Hey there, everyone. So I've been talking a lot about processes, quality management system, recently ISO 9001, 2015. So future videos are going to be breaking down the different elements within that standard that breaks down our quality systems that many companies across 160 odd countries utilize. So what is ISO? So it's the International Organization for Standardization, and they have created a number of standards for a number of things, quality being the parent process standard. But you, again, as I've said in other videos, have many different things: safety, environmental, IT, food service. There's a lot. So it's all about having processes in place, and it depends on the size of your company. So let's break down ISO 9001 2015. So again, this is it's a document that you should actually buy. It's copyrighted. You might be able to find it out there on the web, but it's not something that normally is just given away. So there's 10 pieces in there, 10 clauses that you would need to follow. Now, the first three are just, those actually wouldn't be found in a quality control plan per se. Normally you start from 4 down to 10 for quality management system. So the first one is the scope. Okay, so scope is number one. That's the first clause. And again, not every company is going to outline their system exactly the same. You may have a mom and pop shop that's small with a few employees, might not even really have to worry about ISO. It depends, but it's going to be small. But if you have a small restaurant, still has to have quality ingrained into the operation, because you have to ensure that food is being served at the right temperatures, cooked in the right temperatures. There's a lot that goes on at a restaurant, and a lot of different areas, governments that may audit you. So even if you're small, you still have to have a quality system in place. And number 2 and 3 are basically references in terms, conditions. There's really not a whole lot in there. So the meat of it starts at 4, which I'll start in my next video to break down. And again, the whole thing is about having a system in place for your customer and or client. That's the scope. What do you need to be successful? All right. Hey everyone. So for this video, since I started talking about ISO 9001 2015 and the quality system that many companies create, designed around that system that is all across the world. Previous video I kind of went through clause 1 through 3, which is very short and standard. There's not a whole lot in there. Normally the quality system that is designed starts with clause 4, which is context of the organization. There's a number of subclauses underneath that, but the one subclause that I'll do for this video is 4.1. So essentially in there it says that we need to look at external and internal issues, right? So what's an external and internal issue? And again, it depends on the size of your company. Small companies don't have to go crazy with it, but the larger companies, especially the national companies, the ones that are in multiple countries, the larger ones need to really break that down, because there's a lot more that impacts them. So external can be political, legal. We have a lot of regulations that pertain to companies in various countries. So those are the different elements that you would look at as an external. All right. So what are those? What is your list of what impacts you as a company, as a program or a project, when it relates to something external? Internal could be how the organization is structured. So your organizational structure, roles, responsibilities. What's your policy, your goals, your objectives as a company, program, or project that you're shooting for. What are the different systems that you may be using that's internal? What governs you as a company. You can even look at culture as something as internal. A lot of companies utilize employees from all over the world, and that's part of the culture that will impact a company program or project as well, because you have so many individuals, which I've been a part of companies like that as well. So those are a couple things to look at: external and internal issues for a company. Hey everyone, so I'm going to continue to talk about ISO 9001-2015. The next clause to discuss is 4.2, and that is the interested parties you may have. What's the needs and expectations from them? They could be your customer, your client, the government, wherever you may be, contractors, subcontractors, anyone who's interested in what you are doing for them is an interested party. So normally in a quality system, you would outline all those individuals so that you, as a company, program, project, are aware of that. Because the next step is on, further into ISO is how you work with them, communicate with them. You document, what you do for them or with them in some cases. So it's just important that you outline anyone who's interested as a company, program, or project. All right, so it's relatively simple. Just think who will impact you, positive or negative. That doesn't even matter. Just think of anyone. You could even include employees in that as well, because employees are an interested party in the company. We play a part in our company, so we're also an interested party as an employee. So as a company, they need to be aware of that. All right. So continuing the discussion on ISO 9001-2015, the next clause I'm going to talk about is 4.3, which is determining the scope of your quality system, which I have spoken about in other videos about. Every company is different. They all have different requirements, so they have to look at how they're going to handle their quality system individually. So a quality control plan or a quality manual may look different in different companies. So you have to look at what you actually need in a quality system. Who do you need it for? So it has to capture any of your customer client requirements, any internal requirements, which I talked about in a previous video about external or internal issues. What kind of documents are you going to need? Now, going through ISO, not every single clause is needed for every company. If you were to be audited by a third party to get certified in ISO, whatever standard it may be, they may ask you why you do not need to follow a certain clause. But not everyone's going to have to incorporate every single clause in ISO within their quality system. But that has to be explained in the quality plan or manual. So the scope just depends on your company, your program, your project, whatever it may be, on what you need to be successful for your customer, for your client, and for yourself. Okay, so you have to look at all aspects of it, from outside to inside. What do I need to be successful? And again, the mom and pop shops, stores, small ones may not even need anything relevant to this, but even small restaurants have to have quality in place because of so many stringent requirements for food temperatures. But the bigger company you are, the more you may need in a quality system to ensure that you're meeting all different requirements. All right. So more to follow on that, because a little bit of what we already talked about in previous videos tie into this, and a lot more future videos are also going to tie into this particular clause 4.3. Okay. All right, so for this video, we're going to finish out clause 4 of ISO 9001-2015, and that's clause 4.4. It's quality management system and processes. So as I've been talking in other videos, this whole thing is about putting together a quality system for a business to be successful for their customer and or client. So clause 4.4, when it talks about quality management system and processes, is basically for a business to define what they need to be successful. What are the main processes, documents, whatever you may want to call them, work instructions, whatever, that pertains to you that is going to be needed to ensure that you are successful for the requirements that you have for, or I should say from your customer and client, also to include anything internal. Who's going to be responsible? What are the different roles? And also this pertains to ensuring anything external is captured, and that's generally external, meaning the customer and client requirements, also any other government regulatory requirements that will affect you, plus anything internal. So again, our quality management system that we design for our business has to capture everything, whether it's external or internal, so that we are successful to both our client customer requirements and our own that we design. And again, our quality management system will be different for everyone. So a lot of these elements are going to continue to be touched on throughout the different clauses in ISO. The next one coming up, clause 5, talks a little bit about leadership, the different elements in there. So again, the entire quality management system that is designed for your needs and requirements to be successful for your client, your customer, and your internal goals as a company, as a program, as a project, whatever it may be. All right. So in a nutshell, that is clause 4.4 of ISO 9001-2015. And a lot of different elements that I'm going to be talking about in further videos are tied to this clause, talking about leadership, roles, responsibilities, documents. So more to follow. Hey everyone. So for this video, I'm going to talk about clause 5 of ISO 9001-2015, which is leadership and its commitment. So I've said that before in previous videos, that leadership has to have buy-in in the quality system. They have a place in the quality system. So this is essentially the location in a quality plan or manual, whatever a business wants to call it, where you're going to outline leadership's involvement. Okay. Oftentimes you'll see an org chart in there breaking down the org structure of the business. Oftentimes, and it's preferred that there is a quality team in that org structure, and they would be answering directly to the top, whoever that may be. But I've seen it countless times where there is no quality system. I mean, I should say there's no quality team to keep an eye on the quality system. So it's the program manager or project lead or a director or whoever it may be, the top dog, so to speak, in that business. That doesn't usually work because oftentimes they have more than just quality to keep an eye on. They also have safety and other elements, and it's a lot to do for one person, depending on the size of the business. So I've always been an advocate of having a quality team in place, even if it's one person, depending on the size of the business. They have to be independent because they should be auditing all aspects of quality, all requirements that that business may have for its customer and client or internal. But it's just, as I said in previous videos, the lack of quality hurts a business oftentimes. The cost of poor quality or no quality will have a detrimental effect. It'll hurt you in the long run. I've seen that happen multiple times where they have not met requirements and they've gotten penalized, and that took some money from their contract. No one wants that, right? So this is a chance for leadership to put their part in to the quality plan manual to ensure that the requirements are all being met, that quality is being looked at, and leadership is committed to quality in the workplace. All right. In the end, it depends on the business on how they want to actually watch over it, whether it's a quality team or not. But it's an important piece of a quality system. All right. Till then, Justin Buzzard back with you, aka the tired QA guy. For this video, I'm going to continue to discuss ISO 9001-2015, namely customer focus, which is 5.1.2. I've been bringing up customer and client requirements and satisfaction a lot in my videos because for most businesses, that's why they're in business, is for their customer and or client. So for this part, when you create a quality system, a quality plan, manual, you have to outline those requirements. What do you need for your customer client? What do they need? So what's the requirements? It needs to be laid out in that plan or manual. So other things to look at for your customer and client is how do you communicate with them? Oftentimes in certain fields, like say retail, it'll be in person. You're face to face with your customer on a daily basis. Other times you may be communicating with them through email or other correspondence, MS Teams, Google Meet, Skype, whatever it may be, right? You may have to give them a phone call. So you have to outline all the ways you communicate with your customer and client in that plan or manual. So oftentimes a lot of businesses look at risk as only safety risks. But under this clause, you need to look at risk and opportunities from a quality standpoint. What is the risk that pertains to what you are doing right now for your customer and or client from a quality standpoint, right? Safety is important and that needs to be separate, but there's a lot of quality related risks out there. Do you have enough people to be successful? Do you have enough trained people to be successful? Is transportation and weather an issue? Is getting supplies, materials, equipment a risk in your business? There's a lot more that you could look at that's a quality risk. So just remember when you're putting this together, look at what you need for success. What is your requirements from them? What are the risks in giving them what they need? And how do you communicate with your customer and client? All right. So that's all under that clause 5.1.2 in ISO. All right. Something to think about. Hey, back with you to continue to discuss ISO 9001-2015. And for this video, it's going to look at the quality policy. So quality policy is 5.2 and has a couple sub-clauses underneath it. And other standards can mirror this as a safety policy, environmental policy, whatever it may be for those standards. But the intent behind a quality policy is to put in writing the intent behind your business's goals, essentially. So the policy normally is something that outlines what you're going to do for your customer and client. So you're going to strive for excellence, 100% customer satisfaction, 100% meeting requirements. Every business will write in a little bit different depending on their requirements and needs from the customer or client. But it also needs to include objectives. And again, those could be varying depending on the business and what they're doing. Each industry is going to be a little bit different, but oftentimes objectives need to touch on how you're going to improve things, which I'll get into further in more future videos. I've already touched on it in previous videos, but we should always be looking at improving things internally. Different metrics that you're going to be capturing to show that you're doing whatever is needed. Customer satisfaction, client satisfaction. You have to have something in place to track how you are doing, because without it, you may have no idea how you're doing in their eyes. Those are just a few objectives that you can include in a policy. It's important, though, that you communicate this, because it's oftentimes the case where employees have no idea this thing exists, and they are the ones that ensure that that policy is met. It's not leadership. Leadership's the one that has to create it from top down. It's their responsibility, but it's the employees doing the work every day on ground that ensures that that policy is met for the company and for the customer and client. So communicate it, train on it, and it should be documented. Because if it's not documented, it doesn't happen or didn't happen. So train on it. So creating it is the first step. That's coming from leadership top down, and then communicating it and training it. It should be posted in a central location for employees to at least point to it and refresh themselves. All right. Hey everyone, Justin Buzzard back with you to talk about the last piece of Clause 5 in ISO 9001-2015. That's Clause 5.3. That's looking at the org structure, the roles, responsibility, who's the ones that are responsible for the quality system that is set up. Because as I've said in previous videos, not everyone has a quality team. So this part of a quality plan is designed to show the responsible individuals or section that is going to be keeping an eye on the system that is put in place for ultimately the customer and our client. So again, regardless if you have a quality team in place, this is where business will put in that person who's responsible for ensuring compliance to the requirements that are required by the business to meet the customer client requirements. How often they may report any issues. Oftentimes, and it's going to be in a further clause about quality management review. A lot of businesses may do it once a year. Some businesses may do it once a month. It depends on the size and scope of the business. But there should be reports of some sort being sent to the top leadership to ensure that we're doing what we need to be doing. Communication, of course, is important. So whoever is responsible needs to be communicating, promoting quality, ensuring that everyone's focused on the customer and client requirements, what they need, that we're doing it. One thing that I've seen in a lot of businesses, and it doesn't even matter if it's a small or big business, that there's oftentimes a single point failure. So a lot of people will be designated to do something. That person goes on vacation or is out sick, and then there's no one doing whatever that responsibility is. So it's important that you look at a delegation of authority. There should be something in writing to ensure that there's people there to cover down whatever the requirement is. So we don't have single point failures, which is a problem. So keep that in mind when you're looking at the org structure and who's responsible for what, that there's at least more than one person that's involved in it. All right? So the next clause we're going to be looking at is Clause 6. All right? So for this video, I'm going to continue to talk about ISO 1, 2015, specifically Clause 6, which is looking at planning, which is very important. If you aren't planning correctly, you have the high likelihood to fail. Planning is very important before starting any business venture, any project. But let's look a little bit at one of the subclauses, 6.1, which is actions taken to address risk and opportunities. And there's risk in everything we do, whether it's driving to and from work or in the workplace, which could be a lot of quality risks, safety risks, environmental risks, IT risks. There's so many out there, but we're talking about quality. So think of your quality risks when you are focusing on your quality system. But for this clause in particular, you need to design a way of tracking those risks so that you can mitigate, if not eliminate it. Okay? So from a quality standpoint for auditing, you have to have a risk matrix of some sort developed that looks at the likelihood and the impact of whatever the service may be. All right? So if there's a high likelihood and a high impact of whatever that service is, that's going to be a negative impact, I should say, to the customer or client, then it's a high risk. If it's a low likelihood, a low impact of something negative occurring, then you may be in a low risk situation. But that is all based for your audit surveillances, whether it's a quality individual or program manager, whoever is designated to keep an eye on whatever the service is. So just remember that you need to look at all risks along with ways to mitigate them, but also opportunities for improvement. That's why it's important to have an improvement program of some sort in place for your business, because you need to be looking at those opportunities to improve upon your work, whatever it may be. So you have to have that system, which we'll get into also later on different ways to improve. So that's the primary thing for 6.1, looking at risks and opportunities. Hey everyone, I want to continue to talk a little bit more about ISO 9001-2015 clause 6.1, because there's a couple sub-clauses underneath that, and I only got to the first one in the last video. So it's important that when a business, depending on its size, looks at risk, they don't look at it only from a high level where they may put it in a quality plan or manual, and that's it. Especially for larger companies, they may have a lot of internal processes, work instructions that are designed, should be designed at least, for the employee's use to meet whatever requirements the customer and client have. And some may have a lot. There may be dozens, if not hundreds. So what's the risk for each of these documents? What's the risk of that particular function in those documents? It should be outlined in those processes, not just in the quality plan, but in those individual processes. How are they going to be handled? And oftentimes, and it happens where you just throw a list of risks in there, but there's nothing in there that shows how you're going to mitigate it, eliminate it, even pass it off to someone else. So it's important that you have something in place from a quality standpoint that outlines all the risks in your functional area, as well as how you're going to handle it. All right. And then once you have all that outlined, because again, this is part of planning. That's what clause 6.0, 1, 2 is for, is planning. You have to then train your employees on those risks that were identified and mitigating actions, because they are the ones that's going to be working them, seeing them every day, handling them. So, identification, actions taken to mitigate, eliminate, and communicate them to the workforce. All right, that's all very important. It's all needed. Some businesses may not have as many risks than others, but you got to look at them. And it's not just quality. There could be others that are out there for other plans, safety, environmental, whatever it may be. All right. Hey, everyone. All right, so I'm going to get a little bit further into Clause 6, which is planning for ISO 9001-2015. Specifically, this one is going to cover the quality objectives, which is 6.2. Next video will be 6.3, which will close out Clause 6 for planning. But the quality objectives are tied to the quality policy, which I spoke on in a previous video. Depending on the size of a company, a business, they may have a couple objectives, they may have several. Normally, these objectives are in place for whatever the customer or client wants, maybe anything internal. But normally, you look at customer client satisfaction. How are you doing for them? What's their opinion of you? You have to have something in place to capture that. How are you improving things for your customer and your client? Again, you have to have a way of capturing that. Are you meeting all requirements? That could be another objective. So for each of these objectives, you have to have a way of measuring it, of tracking it. How are you doing in meeting them? All right. If you don't have that metric, that data, then you've already failed this part of Clause 6. So it's very important that whatever the objective is that you create is tracked. Okay. And you can also track this during management reviews, which will be a future video as well. So you can keep an eye on it and make sure it's being followed. All right. So just make sure that whatever you create is being tracked. Okay. And it's all for your customer and your client in the end. All right. Welcome back. So this will be the final video for the ISO 9000-2015 Clause 6 discussion. 6.3 is the last subclause under planning, and that is the tracking of changes, the planning of changes. Now, change happens all the time, whether it's in our work life or our personal life. In theory, change should be easier in our work life because you should have a system in place to track change, because change happens in everything we do, right? So from a business standpoint, if you're interested in a quality management system and in following ISO 9001-2015, you have to have something in place to track that change. So if something comes from your customer or your client or maybe even internal, there has to be a way to talk about it, to discuss the change, to make sure that the change is controlled, documented, communicated, which is very important because oftentimes change happens and no one knows about it, and that's a serious problem. And I see it happen all the time. So if there's a change, those that are impacted, which could be the entire business, needs to know about it, of course, because if they don't, whatever that change is going to fail if they're not a part of the change. So developing the change once you have received it through maybe modification of an internal process that you may have, communicating that change to all those that are affected is key to the success of change in a business. So just remember that 6.3, planning of change, is quite important because change happens all the time and you have to ensure that it is planned properly, and communication is a big piece of that. So just remember that when something comes down the pipeline in your business and you handle it in a proper way. All right. And sometimes change from our customer and client might not work, and we have to go back to them with the reason why. That's why discussion is important. All right. So that's it for Clause 6 of ISO 9001 2015. Hey there. All right, so for this video, I'm going to start the conversation on Clause 7 of ISO 9001 2015. That's Clause 7 as in support, which is an important one because there's a lot of elements under support that various businesses need to track. And the first subclause under Clause 7 support is resources, which is vital. So depending on the size of the business, they may have a lot of resources needed or very little, but resources need to be tracked. That's staffing levels. So people are an important part of any business, of course. Materials and equipment, what you need to be successful as an employee, as a business. Even infrastructure, facilities, internet, all that is part of resources. So all of it needs to be tracked and managed. So once you do have a list of what you need to be successful, you have to have a way of tracking it to make sure you have enough, all right? Because if you don't, then you need to go out and get more, right? But if you're not tracking any of that, you may not be successful for your customer and or client. So it's an important topic. So just remember, resources need to be tracked at some level, whether it's in your internal documents, processes, per task, or an overall list, especially when it comes to personnel, materials, and equipment that you need to function and be successful on a daily basis. All right. Hey there. So I'm going to continue from my last video talking about Clause 7 under ISO 9001 2015, which is support. Specifically, the subclause under resources 7.1. So the next one is 7.1.2, which is people, which we're not all been taken over by robots in the workplace. At least not all of us have. So people are an important piece of any business. So it's important that a business keeps track of how many people that they need to be successful, has something in place for tracking levels. Kind of certain businesses do have some requirements needed to staff certain positions and a certain amount of positions. It depends on the contract and the business. But having something in place to ensure that the right folks are getting recruited is important. Having some kind of an HR in place, a human resources team in place, hiring managers, those that need the individuals, need to be reviewing applications, again, ensuring that people are getting hired where they need to get hired. You got the right people with the right knowledge and certifications and training and all that good stuff. But it's also important that any business ensures that their people are taken care of. And I know that's a hot topic across the world right now. A lot of folks don't believe that they are getting treated the right way. They're not getting paid enough money, and oftentimes that is the case. So businesses need to look at the welfare of their company by taking care of the people that are doing the work, interacting with their customer and clients. Retention is important. You want to be able to keep a good team together because if you don't, it's a little more chaotic. It's a little more difficult in the workplace to deal with people coming in and then leaving shortly after. So this is an important clause within ISO for a company to keep an eye on because the people are what make the work happen out in the workplace, and they need to be taken care of. Of course, until we're all turned into robots or replaced by robots. All right. Hey, everyone. So I'm back to talk about where I left off with Clause 7 of ISO 9001 2015, which touches on resources. So the next part to talk about is 7.1.3, which is infrastructure. And oftentimes folks don't think of that as a quality thing, but it is, because in order to have a good quality system in place, you have to have what you need to be successful in place, which is buildings, infrastructure, right? communication, internet, equipment that you need to do whatever you're going to be doing, transportation as well. Oftentimes, businesses will say, you get your butt to work, and you hopefully do, right? But there's other times where they have to get you to work, so they'll get the buses, the vans. So they have to have a system in place to ensure that there's backups in case something goes down. The vehicles are maintained so they don't lose time if something were to happen and they lose a group of folks from working. So just remember that in order to have a good quality system, you have to touch on infrastructure. That is a part of ISO. It's a part of a quality system. It is also something reviewed during the quality management reviews to ensure that you have what you need. And if you don't have a resource and you need it, you identify it. And hopefully senior leaders see that and they will address it. Okay? So again, just remember that infrastructure is a part of quality. It is a part of ISO. It is a resource. And all companies, even small ones, need to have something in place for their customer and clients, whether it's a small building, big building, internet, or whatever it may be. All right. Hey there. So I'm going to continue with this video continuing to discuss the resource portion of ISO 9001:2015 Clause 7. This one in particular is 714, which is the environment you work in, that you operate in. That is that clause. This one oftentimes is overlooked by businesses, but it's on the business to ensure that whatever the work environment is that you are working in is compliant to a quality standard and to ISO if they follow ISO 9001:2015. That is your physical well-being. It is your emotional and mental well-being. Physical oftentimes incorporates safety, so they need to put in place PP or other controls to ensure that you go home in one piece and healthy. Another way of improving the workplace, hopefully mentally at least, is an open door policy with leadership. That may not always happen in all companies, but if they do have a quality system in place and they have to follow ISO, then they need to find ways to ensure that your mental well-being is taken care of, as well as your physical and emotional needs and everything that pertains to that, because we, as an employee of that company, is out there on the work floor doing whatever's needed for ensuring that the company is successful for their customer and or client, right? So even though oftentimes this subclause may be overlooked, it is an important one that businesses need to be aware of and ensure is in place. Hey everyone, back at you to continue to talk about resources under ISO 9001:2015 Clause 7. There's a lot of clauses, subclauses under Clause 7. Resources, of course, is an important element in what we do. This particular video talks about the monitoring and measurement tools, 7.1.5. So if a business requires something that needs to be calibrated, a meter, torque wrench, whatever it may be, they have to track that. So they have to, of course, know that they need it, and then they have to have it on an inventory, and then they have to ensure that it's being calibrated when it needs to be calibrated. Another important element, because this clause has a couple of subclauses under it itself, is that in addition to being tracked, monitored for what needs to be calibrated and when, there also needs to be some element within paperwork that ensures that device, whatever it is being tracked to the service that's being conducted. Oftentimes in many businesses, especially bigger ones, equipment will be numbered in some way. In addition, the individuals that are using it should also be annotating that they're using that item against whatever the work may be, because it's all about traceability. So you'll see that in that ISO standard about traceability. You got to be able to track the equipment to the work, because if the equipment itself is not calibrated within the time frame it should be, and you're using it, then you'll probably have to go back and redo whatever you're doing. No one really wants to rework. It's a waste of time, money, resources. So that's why it's important to have a program put in place. That's why this is here in ISO. It's part of the quality system to document what you need and track it for calibration, and then track it for when it's utilized. All right. It's all meant to be in place to ensure that you're doing what you need to for your customer and your client the right way the first time around. So no one wants to have to go back and redo it. All right. So do it right the first time. Right. So, any business that has all this needs to track this within their quality system. All right. Back at you to continue to discuss what everyone, I'm sure, is growing to love, and it is resources. So, as I said in the previous video, there's a lot of sub-clauses under ISO 9001-2015 Clause 7, and this video is going to continue to discuss that portion, which is in particular 716, which is organizational knowledge, which simply means knowledge of the employees to do what they need to do, which is oftentimes training. So, of course, most businesses should go out and get the best candidate to fill a role. It may not always be possible. I know there's a lot of issues going on around the world with labor and filling in positions. But every business does things a little bit different. So no matter what you have been doing, even if you're an expert in your field, you could have been doing it for decades, each company does things a little bit different because many companies have different requirements from their customer and clients. So as a new employee, you need to be aware of that. You may have a lot of knowledge in your field that you bring to the company, which is great, but be open-minded to learning new things from that company, from that business, because they may have a different approach that you're not aware of, or you may have a different approach that they can take on to do things a little bit better for the customer and client. But training is very important. So for all new employees, when they start their work, whatever it may be, leadership on ground needs to ensure that they're trained on what is required, because otherwise they'll have no idea. It'll be kind of chaotic, and the customer and or client may not get what is needed. So having a good training program in place is very important to ensure that all employees start off the right way. All right. Also, there may be some positions that require certain licenses or trade certifications that the business may have to track. It may oftentimes be the employee's responsibility to get it renewed, but the business also may play a part in that. So those are different elements that need to be addressed, looked at for a particular business's requirements, a different position. Not everyone needs trade certifications or licenses to do their job, but it's something that a business should be keeping an eye on. Hey there, everyone. Back again for another video talking about Clause 7 in ISO 9001-2015. It seems like it's never going to end, right? So this one is 7.2. It is about competence. Competence. And it's a very short piece of ISO, but it's an important one because depending on the business and the field and what they're doing, ensuring a competent person is in place is important for the success of the mission. So oftentimes it's related to safety, but there may be other positions that a company needs to ensure that they have the right person in the right job, which is essentially what is really required for this. So the business needs to appoint the right person, and oftentimes in writing who that is, to ensure that they have the right person with the right experience, education, training to do whatever that task may be. So Even though competence is a small part of clause 7, it is an important one because if you throw someone in there that has no idea what the heck they're doing, it kind of makes it a little difficult, and it could be dangerous too. So it's an important, even though it's a small one, it's an important piece of a quality system. All right. Hey everyone. All right, so I'm going to continue to talk about clause 7. It's a big clause. So this one is about 7.3. All right, and this is under ISO 9001 2015. So this one is awareness. This one, when you're building a quality system and you're completing this portion, you have to have something in place to ensure that all the employees are aware of what is required of them, how they play a part in the business's quality management system. Oftentimes that's through training, through communications. So you might send out quality moments or alerts or there's notifications of various things. It's just about letting folks know that they play a part, a critical part, important part, in ensuring that whatever they're doing is for the customer and client, and it should be done the right way the first time, and it's 100% compliant at all times for whatever the requirement is. They should know that what they're doing is important, and it does impact the business. So we should always, of course, strive for excellence in everything we do. Roles and responsibilities is also an important piece, depending on the business, the size, what they're doing, how big it is. Everyone needs to know their role, their position in the company, and how they play a part in the business, the org structure. But the awareness clause really is just about ensuring that everyone involved knows their part, and it needs to be communicated often. And depending on the size of your quality management system and different parts, may have to be communicated on a regular basis to ensure that they're getting that knowledge. Right. So just make sure that when you're putting together a quality system, a quality plan, quality manual, that this part does touch on communication, training, knowledge of the quality system. And you can do the same for an environmental system, a safety system, whatever other system that you have in place in your company. It's all about knowledge and ensuring that everyone knows they play a part, because we all do play a part in our business, right? It's not just one or two people, it's everyone. All right. Everyone. All right. So welcome back to the continuing discussion of clause 7 from ISO 9001 2015. All right. Again, never ending clause, right? 7.4 is the next one. This continues from where I left off in the last video about awareness. So 7.4 is communication. So, I talked about communication is important when it comes to awareness, because everyone has to kind of know what they need to be doing and who's doing what and all that fun stuff. Communication is an important piece for any company, and from what I've found over the years, is one of the biggest pieces that all companies seems to miss or can do better with, right? And that's all companies. That's from work even into our personal lives. Communication is oftentimes lacking, right? So a business, if they're going to have a quality system in place, they're going to follow quality principles, needs to have a communication plan of some sort in place. It needs to break down who they communicate with, customer, client, internal, whatever it may be. How they communicate, it could be email, it could be telephone, it could be virtual, whole bunch of ways, face to face. So who, how, what is communicated is also quite important. Because as I said in the previous video about awareness, folks need to be told various things about the company, different aspects of it. Especially from a quality standpoint, they need to understand how they fall under the quality system and why it's important that they know what's going on, because they ensure compliance for whatever the requirement is for the company, for the customer and or client. So communication. It's kind of like training. You know, those are hot topics. They're important to talk about. They're important to remember. And whether it's a small business or a big business, they have to communicate, right? Because even if a business has a couple people, the owner still has to tell them what's needed, right? So just want to bring that up. It's an important topic. I've seen it as a problem area often, many times in my many years of working out there, even when I wasn't working quality. So just something to remember when you look at a quality system, putting together a quality plan and manual, looking at this clause, and making sure you have something in place. All right, back with you to close out clause 7 of ISO 9001:2015. Almost seemed like it was going to take forever, right? So this one is an important one, if not the most important part, because it's documented information. That's the name of this clause, which is 7.5. Because if it's not documented, it didn't happen, is oftentimes the case. The documented information is essentially a company, a business, needs to ensure that they have in place for the customers documented information, forms, whatever it may be, to show them that they're doing whatever that customer or client wants. So you have to have something in place for the employees to utilize, a process to follow, to explain how to fill out those various forms. Then they have to be controlled in some way. Depending on the company, they may have a SharePoint, a site, somewhere where those forms are located so that the employees can go and pull them out when they need them. The forms itself should also be controlled so that employees can't just do whatever they want with them, because that often happens. So controlled as in, say it's an Excel spreadsheet, and you want to make sure that the employees are only filling out certain parts of it and the rest are locked, right? Because the intent is to give the customer, the client, the document the way it's intended to be. All right. So again, it will vary by the companies, by the services, whatever is being done, how forms are handled. But normally the forms are numbered in a certain way, and they're controlled within that document control system by the company. Whether they have a document control clerk or someone else, who knows? Again, it depends on the company, because some are small, some are big, and oftentimes you may have multiple tasks. So this one is just important because you have to have something in place first. Then it has to be controlled, it has to be accessible, and it has to be communicated, because again, that's a problem we already talked about in previous videos, communicating change of the documents, because you may modify something, you may have something new. If the employees don't know, they're going to keep using what they think is the current document, and it's not, it's obsolete. And depending on the situation of the company, that may get them in trouble if they have to have something in place, controlled, and they're audited against that. If they're audited by their customer, their client, a third party, internal, whatever, it's important to have the latest and greatest. All right. Hey everyone. All right. So hopefully everyone's doing okay so far in 2023. This will be a short video. We already completed the review of Clause 7 for ISO 9001:2015. So that leaves Clause 8. So there's a bunch of subclauses under Clause 8, which I'll get into in other videos, but this one is operations. So the operation of a company is, of course, important, especially when it comes to quality. A lot of what we already talked about in all of the other previous clauses are going to be discussed in this one again, because now you're actually putting different things into place. Actually, the next clause, subclause, is planning. So planning and controlling what you have put in place for a quality system. All right, so more to follow. Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well wherever you are in the world. So let's talk planning and control. That is ISO 9001 2015 clause 8.1, which is where we left off after the previous video. So we talked about planning in a previous video. It's an earlier clause. But this part, if you are developing a quality system, a quality plan, quality manual, whatever you want to call it, this is the part where you have to dedicate a section to ensure that whatever you have put in place, a system of documents for your employees as a business to follow for meeting whatever requirement your customer or client has, is actually followed through. So control is important because oftentimes you have to have controls in place for, say, documents, a central location for your employees to pull out the documents they need, control over the different documents you may have, because if you don't have controls in place, you'll have a whole bunch of stuff out there and you have no idea what it may be. So if something needs to be changed, if you need something new, then it has to be put through a controlled change management of some sort. If it's a meeting, whatever it is to discuss, there should be buy-in with the individuals who are going to use it, because they may know more than someone who may not. Because oftentimes, I've seen it happen many times, where leadership in that area, or even a leader outside of that area, is the one that has to update or do whatever changes is needed. They have no idea because they're not out there in the workplace, on the work floor, doing the work all the time. So they don't know if that change, that document, is actually meeting requirements. So getting buy-in from all the individuals that are involved in it is important. But 8.1 is really about putting in place what was talked about earlier in an earlier clause, and ensuring there's controls in place to get you what you need. Whatever you have in place needs to be looking at the risks that are involved, and hopefully you fixed or have addressed those risks in whatever documents you may have, whether it's internal that you're going to be using, or if you're going to have another company do stuff. Control is important. Risks are important. So that is that's 8.1 in a nutshell. All right, I hope everyone's doing okay today. All right, so I'm going to continue from where I left off, talk about ISO. So clause 8.2 is the next one. That one is requirements of product or service. Whichever company or business may have, sometimes maybe both. But the first subclause underneath it is talking about customer information, customer feedback, customer satisfaction. Whether a business has a communication plan in place or not, they have to have a way to show that they have communications with their customer, their client, methods, what they're communicating, whether they're getting feedback from their customer and or client, because that, of course, is important. We all are in business to do whatever is needed for the customer and client, whether it's creating something or providing a service. So we want to hear from them, because we may have a different point of view than they do. So we want to hear feedback from them in order to possibly improve what we're doing for them. All right. So this subclause 8.2.1 about communication with customers it's an important one, and we've already talked about in previous videos, customer satisfaction, customer service. Whether or not you have a documented system in place or not, if you're interested in having a good quality system, if you're interested in being certified in ISO, you have to have something to show in documentation that you have something in place as a process on how to handle communications with your customer and client. All right. That's why I've always suggested just having a communication plan in place that breaks down how you communicate, who do you communicate with, who's the ones communicating within the business, because sometimes you'll have a certain point of contact that is the one that handles the customer or client directly. All right, so we've already talked about this in previous videos, and it's going to continue to be brought up in future videos because customer satisfaction, customer requirements are throughout ISO and throughout a quality management system. All right, hope all you out there are doing well today. All right, so I'm going to pick up where I left off on the last video talking about Clause 8 in ISO 9001-2015. So 8.2 is the next one, and that's determining the requirements for products or services. Now, Clause 5 and 6, when it came to planning and resources, touched on different elements of this. But when we look at 8.2.2, you really have to have something in place, in some form of documentation to show that you are actually tracking what you as a business has as a requirement from your customer and or client, and how you are ensuring that it is in place and followed from beginning to end, ensuring that what you need to be successful is there. We already talked about resources being very important. It's critical that you have to track what you need to be successful, and it could be staffing, it could be materials and equipment, and all that other fun stuff to ensure that you're meeting the requirements for your customer or client. Now, as I said in the last video, a lot of Clause 8 touches on ensuring that what was established is actually being done. Clause 10 is looking at essentially a management review to ensure that a lot of what we've been going through is being tracked by leadership. So during those management reviews, a lot of this will be looked at to ensure that you are meeting all the needs for your customer and your client. If anything's changed, if you have enough adequate resources, staffing levels, materials, equipment, software, whatever else you need to be successful. So again, a lot of these clauses tie together throughout, right? So we kind of touch on certain ones repeatedly, okay? But 8.2.2 is just ensuring that you as a business, whatever its size, small, big, has what you need against the requirements that you have to meet for your customer and or client. All right. Hope everyone out there is doing well today. For this video, I'm going to dive into Clause 8.2.3 from ISO 9001-2015, and that is the review of requirements for the products and services, which is essentially you are getting requirements to do whatever it may be, and you have to ensure that you can meet those requirements from your customer or client for achieving them. So somehow, and again, it depends on the size of the company, you have to have something in writing, something documented to show that you're doing a review of those requirements. Because you're not, even from a good business standpoint, you shouldn't accept something that you can't do, you can't achieve. So whether it's a contracts team, an operations team, senior leaders that receive something from the customer or client, there has to be a collaboration amongst the business leaders, whoever they may be, whoever's affected, to do that review of whatever's required of them and provide feedback to the customer or client. Because maybe not all times you can actually do what they need, and you might have to go back with some questions to get more answers. So really this clause is just to ensure that you have in place a method somehow to document a review of what's required of you. Because if you're interested in having a quality system in place, if you're interested in being compliance certified to an ISO standard, This is one of those elements that you have to show through documentation that you're doing. Change management, and I've said this in previous videos, is very important. You have to, again, especially for the medium to large size companies, have to have a method in place to keep an eye on changes, because changes happen all the time in our lives, whether it's our personal lives or business. But from a business standpoint, we have to have that method. All right. So just again, to reiterate, review the requirements that your customer and or client wants you to do. Ensure that you can do it. If you can't, great. You can let them know that. If not, you can go back and ask some more questions, clarification, say, hey, I just can't do it, with justification. And then just make sure that that change is communicated amongst everyone who needs it. Look at your documents to ensure that those changes are being captured, and then communicate the new revised documents to those who need it. Hey everyone, this is going to be a quick video because I just realized that I kind of touched on this in the previous video. So continuing to talk about ISO under 8.2. 8.2.4 is reviewing the requirements that are changed for a product or service that you're doing for your customer or client. So I touched on that a little bit in 8.3. You have to have something documented to show that you're doing a review of those changes. And if you can't actually do them for your customer and client, then you have to also look at your documentation internally that you're using for your employees, so that they are doing the right thing for your customer and client. So it all has to be documented in some way on the reviews and the updates to documents. Because if you want to be involved in total quality management system and ISO, you need that. Hey everyone, it's a cold and rainy day where I'm at, so hopefully you're having a better weather day where you're at. So for this video, I'm going to continue to push forward into clause 8, specifically 8.3. Now 8.3 has a number of subclauses that I'll touch on in future videos, because this is one of the, at least historically from what I've seen with different companies, one of the more complicated clauses within ISO, because oftentimes folks look at 8.3, which is designing the requirements for a product or service, as a manufacturing type of requirement. But in reality, anyone can fall under this requirement, even a service business or a service contract. So the intent behind 8.3 is having something in place as a company to design the system that ensures that requirements can be met for your customer and or client. Of course, you have to have something documented to show that. So as I go into some of the subclauses underneath it, it'll get a little bit more clear as to what is expected if you're putting together a quality system, and especially if you're planning on following ISO 9001 2015. What is expected for this, but it's all about ensuring that you have in place for your business what you need to be successful for your customer and or client. So more to follow with the subclauses under 8.3. Hope everyone's doing okay today. So I'm going to continue talking about clause 8.3 for ISO 9001 2015. This was a new clause when the 2015 version came out. It's been a while now, of course, but a lot of companies, at least from my experience having interacted with a number of people and companies, really didn't feel that this was something that they did, but it is. So 8.3.2 is going to be what we'll discuss in this video, and that's the design and development planning. So oftentimes when you hear design, you're designing something for a project, housing, buildings, systems, but a a lot of what the customer and or client needs from us has to be designed in a way that we will meet those requirements, right? So even in a service world, this clause will pertain to a company because a customer or client is giving you something to do. You have to design a way to meet their requirements. Now, oftentimes when it comes to solutions, it may be in the IT world where you have to come up with a system to do something for your customer and or client. You have to look at can we do it in-house? Do we have to go out to a third party and pay them to do something? When it comes to, say, construction, your construction buildings and whatnot, can we do it in-house as a business, or do we have to go to a third party to achieve the goals that the customer and client gave us to do? But you have to look at the entire picture to ensure that you have something in place from beginning to end for design and development planning. And that's, again, through documentation. So you have to have a process in place to ensure that you're meeting the requirements your customer and client gave you. And oftentimes developing a system in-house for you as a business to achieve success is important. So it depends on what it is. Depends on your business, depends on what you're doing, that you're designing and developing for your customer and client. So there's so many wide varieties of things out there. It's kind of difficult in a short video to talk about, but this is an important element for whether you're manufacturing something or you're providing a service to a customer. Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well out there. So for this video, I'm going to continue to discuss another subclause under 8.3 in ISO 9001:2015. This one is looking at the input into designing and develop whatever you as a business needs to be successful for your customer and or client. So some things to look at, think about when you're designing your quality system and the documents within to meet this is, what do they need? Of course, first off, right? So you need to design whatever it is against your customer and client requirements, first off, right? And then what may impact you as a business. You may have local laws, you may have state, national laws, you may have international laws. There may be other things out there that will impact you that you have to think about when you're designing, developing whatever it is. You have to have communication with your customer. So that's important. So from the beginning to the end and everything in between, you have to have a way of communicating with your customer on changes, issues. So that has to be part of whatever you're designing for communication. Who's going to be communicating when things come up. Again, like I've said more than once, documentation is important. You have to have documentation to show that you're doing everything in the quality management system. So, what's being checked, validated, right? That all has to be documented in some way. So these are just a few of the aspects that you can look at to ensure that you are meeting 8.3.3 for the inputs that are coming in to you to design what you need. It's all about what the customer and client needs. But you have to look at the big picture because it may not be something small. Because you may have codes that are required for certain things depending on what you're doing. You may be building something and you have electrical codes, right? So whether you're doing a service, whether you're manufacturing something, you're building something, there's always a lot of different inputs that have to be looked at as a business to ensure that you are tracking all of them and you're going to meet all of them for your customer and client. All right. Hey everyone. All right. So for this video, I'm going to continue to talk about Clause 8.3 and specifically 8.3.4, which looks at controls. So I've been talking a lot about design development, because that's been the main feature of 8.3. This one is about how you control whatever you're doing. So whether you are in the service industry or manufacturing, construction, whatever it may be, whatever you design has to have controls of some sort in place. Otherwise, whatever you have designed will not be treated the same way all the time by the employees. So controls are important, whether it's in a process, if whatever you're writing internally to document how you're going to do whatever you're doing for your customer and client, whether you are using a system. So if you design some kind of system, automated system, an IT project, you can have controls built into that as well. The whole intent behind it is that whatever you're doing needs to be done the same way all the time, to give your customer and or client what they want the way they want it. Because if you don't have controls in whatever you're designing, everyone's going to do it differently. And it happens. I've seen it many times. So it's important that whatever you do, you control whatever that is. It could be as simple as a document, right? So without that control, there's a very good chance you're not going to be successful for your customer and or client. So controls are very, very important in whatever you are developing. And it has to be documented. Documentation is important. So whatever you're designing has to have ways to verify whatever you're doing, right? So oftentimes you have to have some kind of quality checks, quality gates, where you're checking whatever it is throughout the process from beginning to end, right? It all has to be verifiable. You have to have a system in place to document that, okay? So just remember that whatever we're doing has to have controls to ensure that what you're doing is the way it needs to be each time, and that you're verifying whatever you're doing from beginning to end for whatever you have put together, put in place to be successful for your customer and or client. And one. All right, so I'm going to continue to talk about 8.3. There's quite a few subclauses in this one as well. There's this one I'm going to talk about and one more. But 8.3.5 looks at the design and development output. So whatever you developed has to be to whatever your customer and or client's needs are. So whatever they needed, it needs to be that way. So within the entire process from beginning to end, there needs to be something to show that it's being checked, right? So that output is accurate. There has to be documentation to check that. So verification throughout the process, validation throughout the process is very important, because oftentimes, and it happens, you'll find that at the very end is a problem. And then, oops, we just wasted how long to do what we just did for them. So it's important to try to catch things early on. That's why there needs to be something in place through documentation, checks and balances within whatever you're developing, whether it's documents, process, work instruction, standard operating procedure, whatever that is for your company, however you want to call it, internal process, or a system that you design to capture whatever it is that you're doing for them. There has to be checks within that. All right, that's very, very important. So, we already talked about in the previous subclauses the inputs and controls, but all that is to ensure that what you're doing gives your customer and client what they expect the same way all the time. Otherwise, everything else was kind of a waste of time. All right. So the last part of 8.3 is 8.3.6, and that is about the design development change. So change happens. I've said that numerous times in many videos. Change occurs within our personal lives, within our work lives. It happens. So you have to control that change. You have to make sure that change, whatever it is controlled in a way that it'll be implemented the right way, and it won't have a huge impact on, say, what you're doing for your customer and or client. So if you design something, something comes up, you have to change whatever it is. You have to have something in place to track that and to organize it. And you might have to have change management meetings to discuss it, but there has to be a discussion on the change. Is it needed? What will it impact? And ensure that your customer and or client is involved in that discussion. Make sure that whatever is decided within your business with your customer and client is worked out with each other, because it has to be authorized. You can't just change something because you want to change it. So it has to be controlled in a way that it's successful for you as a business and for your customer and or client. So, work together, talk it out, make sure it works, communicate it, and just make sure it's authorized with everyone involved to implement that change. All right. Hey there. So now that we've finished the rather long 8.3 clause in ISO 9001-2015, we already talked about throughout that entire thing controlling the inputs, the outputs, the whole process from beginning to end of whatever you design as a system to be successful for yourself and for your customer and client. The next part is 8.4, which is about external products, services. Depending on the size of the company, depending on the business, they may have a ton of subcontractors. Some may not have any. I don't know. But many businesses out there subcontract something, whether it is to get materials, equipment, people. We have to ensure that whatever they're doing for us is successful for us, right? So you have to look at those subcontractors to see, okay, do they need to have their own quality system in place? Do they need to develop it against ISO principles, right? And then you verify what they put together. And you work on it together. And of course, you'll have to keep an eye on it. So it'll be audited. There may be times you have to go out to a site where they are creating a part or whatever it may be for you, and you have to verify things on ground to ensure that they are supplying you with the right stuff, right? So 8.4 is important, and it all depends on what the business has and needs. Not all of us as a business can do things internally. We have to go out to another third-party vendor to do things. So that's why this clause is incredibly important, especially if you do have subcontractors. So you have to determine what they need to be successful for you, because technically when you sub something out, you are now their client, even if you have a client or customer of your own, right? And you just need to work with them on ensuring that they have a good system in place, because you may have to build a quality system with them. The business may not quite understand what you need, and that's where you have to help them out. All right, but this is an incredibly important one, because I work with a lot of companies that we have as a subcontractor, and then they sub out some stuff as well. So we have a sub of a sub, right? So it's important to have something in place to ensure that they're giving you what you need for yourself and your customer and client. Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well out there. So the next several short videos are going to be on 8.5, which is another long one because of the amount of subclauses within it. And a lot of this is kind of touching on stuff we already talked about. It feels like it's a duplication of effort, almost. But it is what it is. It's found within ISO. So for 8.5 itself, for the parent clause, you're looking at the service or product and service, I should say, provision. So a lot of this is looking at documentation. What do you have in place as a business to meet your customer and or client's requirements for whatever you're doing, whether you're creating something for them or providing them a service? So again, we kind of touched on this in numerous other videos. There's quite a few other previous clauses that touch on this. Documentation, of course, is very important. You have to have documentation to show that you're doing whatever you're supposed to be doing, that you're verifying it, you're checking it, throughout the steps, depending on, the scope of what you're doing. Ensuring that you're giving your customer and client what they need in the very end is very important. So you have to have means of verifying compliance and, of course, communication with your customer and client for any issues. But there's a number of subclauses under 8.5. I'll get into each of those in separate videos. But a lot of what we're going to talk about in those has already been brought up in previous videos. So not much of it is new. Some of it will be. All right. Hey, everyone. All right. So the last video I talked a little bit about 8.5 and how certain parts of it are kind of redundant. We've already gone over certain aspects in previous clauses. Then this video is actually going to be about the first subclause, 8.5.1, which is control of the product service provision. So whether you are providing a customer or client a service, or you're creating a manufacturing a product, you have to have controls. So we've already talked about controls a lot. Whether it's a documented process, a work instruction, whatever you may want to call it in your business, that ensures that you as a business are doing what you need to do for your customer and client, and that your employees have a process in writing on how they're going to achieve that, or you're using a system. Controls are important, that you are identifying everything that is needed, that you're verifying it, and you keep it up to date. All right. So again, control is very important. That's why it's brought up more than once in the different ISO clauses. Having a process written is very important, and most businesses, especially the ones that do a lot and have a lot of people, and you have to have different things within it to ensure that you're doing what you need to, period, right? So that is the gist of this subclause. All right, back with you to continue to discuss Clause 8 in ISO 9001-2015, specifically 8.5.2. So we're continuing that 8.5 discussion. So 8.5.2 is about the identification and traceability of what you as a business are doing out there. And it can vary greatly depending on the business size and what you're doing. And this can also be for services and manufacturing. So oftentimes identification has to do with materials and equipment, property that a company is using. And some may have thousands. So you have to have a way to identify all that stuff, right? An inventory, a listing, so you know what is where. And it can be a lot, right? That's why it's important to have a documented system in place to keep an eye on all that. The traceability, and again, it depends on what it is for, but oftentimes it can be for an employee is using a piece of equipment on whatever it may be that they're working on, they're servicing. So a tool to fix equipment, right? So you have to have a way to show through documentation that individual used that particular piece of equipment. And oftentimes a lot of that equipment may need to be calibrated, which is another important thing, because if you have calibrated tools, then you need to keep that calibrated. So there's certain frequencies to do that. So it's important that, in that case, that you're documenting the calibration of the equipment, and that ensures that it's within scope. Because if you use something that's outside the calibration window and you're fixing something, well, you're technically non-compliant. So that's where the traceability comes into play. It's all about documentation, just like everything in ISO in reality. Documentation is very important. So ensuring that you are watching over all the varying equipment, materials, and property. Everything's identified and being managed, as well as traced to any individuals that are using it. It's all documented. All right. So this is an important piece of ISO, especially in certain fields where there's a lot of sensitivity with the equipment that they may be using. So it's important that you have that system in place, watched over, monitored, and tracked. All right. Hey there. So let's talk customer or third-party property. All right. So in a previous video, I briefly talked about customer property. That was actually when I was talking about identification and traceability. There may be times as a business you have either property from your customer or someone else that you are using, and there may be times you have their stuff that you're fixing, right? So there has to be measures in a business when that happens, that you ensure that property, that equipment, materials, software, whatever it may be from that customer and or third party is protected, right? You're safeguarding it. You're ensuring that whatever it is, equipment isn't left outside in the weather and gets ruined, right? So you have to have it stored in a certain way. So for your quality system, you have to have something in place to ensure that you are doing that. And oftentimes, again, it's documentation. If you are using customer property or even maintaining it, you have to have a record to list out all that stuff, so you know where it is, what it is. Even if you as a business doesn't have a say property system in place to have a numbering system, most equipment, most materials of some sort, depending on what it is, has a serial number or some other identification. So you have to ensure that you're tracking it, protecting it. Sometimes you have to be doing inventories. It could be monthly, it could be annual. It depends on your property system. But it's all about ensuring that what you have in your business from your customer or a third party is being protected, stored, tracked, monitored, right? Because it's not your stuff, it's theirs. So you want to ensure that you are doing a good job for your customer in that aspect, so that they come back to you for whatever it is you do, right? Remember, it's not your stuff, it's not your property, it's theirs. So just remember, treat it as you would your own, right? All right, so I'm going to continue to discuss 8.5. All right, so this is, again, another long one. There's a lot of elements within this clause, so some of it has been repeats from other locations in ISO. Some are new, like this one I'm going to talk about. So 8.5.4 is about preservation. So if you are responsible for managing your customers' property, equipment, materials, whatever it may be, you have to ensure that you have something in place to safeguard it, to protect it, store it, so you're not going to damage it. Whether you need to document it or not depends on the business, the size of the business, the scope. As I've said in other videos, if you don't document it, it didn't happen. From an audit standpoint, especially if you want to follow ISO 9001-2015, you have to have something to show the auditor that you're achieving it. Oftentimes you'll have some kind of property plan, maybe something about materials. Depending on the size of your company, you may have a supply or transportation department, so you'll have different elements there that are going to do some aspects of this. So they may have something in writing in their documents to show that they are safeguarding, protecting, packaging the equipment the right way. Because, of course, the larger the business, the more people that work for that company, you have to have something to guide them. So a process, a work instruction, a standard operating procedure, whatever it may be. You have to have it in order for them to be successful for you as a business, and in turn your customer and or client, right? So again, we've already touched on this a little bit in the last couple videos concerning property with the identification and traceability and all that other stuff. There's a lot that goes on in the property world. But in this case, you want to be successful for your customer. They gave you something, equipment, materials, whatever it is. They kind of expect it back the same way, right? So they are relying on you to do that. So however you set up your system, it has to be able to show that you are you are achieving this requirement in ISO. All right. So however you do it, it needs to be known, especially from an audit standpoint. All right. Hey everyone. All right. So I'm going to continue to break down 8.5. Specifically 8.5.5 for this video, which is post-delivery activities, which, again, going through 8.5, this is covering this, but in general, everything you're doing after the fact. So whatever you're doing for your customer and your client, whether it's a service, manufacturing a product, building something, you have to follow up afterwards for certain things. So it depends on the business, of course, what you're doing, the requirements from your customer and or client. You may have contractual requirements. So some examples may be if you have built something, a building, say, there may be warranty activities after that. If you have installed an HVAC unit or some other component, you may have warranty. But you also may have maintenance requirements after the fact. So after you have initially done whatever you were supposed to do, you may have to go back and continue to maintain that. You want to continue to follow up with your customer and or client because there may be some things that they want to bring up to you, feedback that you need to know about. So there are activities needed after you've done a service, right? That's the whole point of this clause. And again, at least from a quality standpoint, you have to have something documented to show those activities, especially if you want to have a total quality management system. If you're interested in certification in ISO, you have to be able to show something to, evidence, documented information-wise, whatever it may be that you're doing this, right? So there may be emails, there may be documents that are part of your internal process on how to handle these activities. You may have maintenance plans corresponding to these activities. If you have maintenance requirements for whatever you initially did, communication, you may have a communication plan that, again, talks about feedback with your customer. You may have it as part of your property management system. If you're dealing with your customer's property, there could be a number of things, right? So it's just important that you have something documented, that you are tracking the activities, that you know about them, that you're monitoring them, and you should be good to go. All right, so continuing the saga of clause 8.5. So this video is going to touch on 8.5.6, which, even though it's a new clause for ISO 9001-2015, it is a repeat of what I've already gone through in previous clauses, and that's control change. So we've already talked about control and change. Now this, again, pertains to clause 8.5, or what we've been discussing, but change is change, so it has to be controlled in some manner. And I've already gone through that in more than one video. So for a quality system, you have to have something in place to control when changes are needed and when they happen. You have to communicate those changes. And again, oftentimes changes are documented in some way. You're changing something for someone for some reason. Customer, your client needs something changed. They communicate that with you. That's at least should be documented. Email. Oftentimes people get phone calls and it's not really documented in that way. So you should always follow up with an email, so you're actually documenting the requirement. And then you're capturing the change in whatever it may be that you're doing for them. And again, especially for the larger businesses, they should be documented in some way in an internal process for the employees to use. So again, change happens. It's inevitable. You have to control it. You have to make sure it's documented, communicated. Because if people don't know of the change, you're going to have some problems, especially if the customer wants something drastically changed. You got to kind of let everyone know about that, right? So just remember, this is important. That's why it's brought up more than once in ISO. So, as I was about to make this video, I was thinking it seems like the folks that designed ISO 9001 2015 are in a competition with each other on which clause can be longer, clause 7 or 8, because it seems like both are never ending, right? So we just finished 8.5. So the last video I had done completed 8.5. There's only 2 more left. There's 8.6 and 8.7. So this video, I'll touch on 8.6, which is release of the products or services. So we've talked about this in previous videos where you want to check what you're doing throughout the life of what you are doing, whether it's a service, you're manufacturing something, you're building something, designing something. You want to make sure that from the beginning to the end that you have checks and balances within your process, whatever it may be, work instruction, SOP, whatever, that helps your employees, guides your employees throughout the process to ensure that they are doing what they need to be doing per the requirements your customer and or client gave you. But there has to be verification and validations within to ensure that once you're done, whatever you are giving to your customer is what they want. We, as a business, should not be interested at all in giving our customer and or client something that's not correct, something that doesn't meet their requirements, because that's bad business, right? Basically, we want repeat customers, we want repeat business, but if we keep doing something, and heck, it can only be one time, and that might be enough. We don't want to give them something that is incorrect, not to their specs, not to their requirements, because they may talk to other companies and they say, hey, you don't want to work for these folks. They suck. They're going to give you crap. We don't want that as a business. We should always be striving for the best we can do and be. We should strive for excellence in everything we do. So just remember that before you give whatever it is to your customer and or client, that you're checking it to make sure it's correct, it meets all the requirements, that you have documentation records that essentially will show that is being done, which is actually going to be kind of part of clause 9, which is auditing. It's looking at all those documents and records, right? So ensure you have the process, make sure it is in line with the requirements from your customer or client. Make sure it's being checked, verified throughout the process, and give your customer and or client what they want, the way they want it every time. Hey everyone, so you've all made it through the review of Clause 8 of ISO 9001 2015. So we finally got through all the sub-clauses. Now we're at 8.7. That finishes it. And that is non-conforming outputs. So even though we've talked about checks and balances throughout the system and making sure we're on top of things, things do happen. We're not perfect. There will be non-conformances within what a business does. It doesn't matter what the business does, whether it's a service or manufacturer or building something, construction. So we all mess up. So it's all about identifying the non-conformance, containing it, making sure it doesn't spread, doesn't get out there, doesn't cause any more issues, and then correct the issue, and then ensure that a preventive action is put in place to never happen again. We never want a problem to impact our customer and our client. At least we shouldn't as a business. We don't want non-conformances out there. I would hope that the employees in the businesses also wouldn't want non-conformances out there. Otherwise, they may be in the wrong line of work. So it's all about having a system in place that will identify that problem, contain it, correct it, and prevent it from happening again. All right. We'll talk a little bit more on that in future videos as well, because there are certain actions that you need to do. I've had some previous videos on this topic, but I'll do it again. It's an important one. Whatever we do needs to be for the customer and or client, and the way they want it. All right. Hey everyone. So in a previous video, I talked about 8.7 closing out clause 8 of ISO 9001:2015, and that talked about non-conforming outputs. Before I jump into the next clause 9, I want to talk a little bit more about that, because in a video I did over a month ago, I talked about root cause and ensuring that corrective preventive actions are developed around the real problem. So 8.7 talked about developing corrective preventive actions against a non-conforming output. But if you don't do a good review to really find the problem, those corrective actions, preventive actions, are not going to fix the issue, and you're going to have issues creeping up again. So if you are in charge of that function that the non-conforming output occurred in, you may have a team to discuss it with, and get that shovel out and do some digging to get to the root cause. Because heck, I just saw one today from a company and their root cause using the 5 why method was 1 why, and we didn't follow the process. Okay, well heck, the second why is why didn't you, right? So it was funny because their corrective action was to create a process. Well, okay, so if you had a process and didn't follow it, why are you creating something new? So when I see those are examples that just tells me that they didn't really look at it the right way. And oftentimes, everyone's in a hurry. Depending on what you do as a business, you have a lot going on. And oftentimes the folks are like, I don't have time for this. Let me just throw something together, right? But you're going to be doing this again when it happens. That's a waste of resources. That's the opposite of quality. We don't want waste, right? We shouldn't as a business. It's a waste of time, money, and just resources in general, right? We have other things to do. So, take it seriously. Look at the actual non-conformance and just dig into it. Go walk through the workplace, walk through your processes. That's why it's important to have documents, because if you don't, those things will come up. Oftentimes I've seen employees get written up for not following a process that doesn't even exist, right? So you have to have something to help the employees, help you as a business be successful for your customer and client, right? So I just wanted to bring that up to everyone. Hey everyone, so we're getting closer to completing the review of ISO 9001:2015. We already went through all the clauses except for 9 and 10, so almost there. A few more videos, so they're the two smaller clauses. 9 has a few subclauses I'll get to more detail on in separate videos, but clause 9 is essentially the the evaluation piece. So, how are you doing as a business? And of course, if you're going to follow ISO and have a good quality system in place, you have to have a way of tracking how you're doing. You have to have customer feedback, ways of capturing that and handling the feedback from the customer, client, and then ways of tracking what you are doing internally. Whether you have a quality team or not, you have to have someone, whoever that may be, to monitor and evaluate through audits, surveillances, whatever you may want to call it, to ensure that you're doing what you should be doing per whatever documents you've created, to ensure that you're meeting your customer and or client's requirements. All right, so that's the gist of clause 9, and I'll have a few extra short videos on the separate subclauses within it. Hey everyone, back with you. So we're into clause 9 of ISO 9001 2015, specifically 9.1 and its subclause 9.1.1, which looks at monitoring, measuring, analysis, evaluation of the system that you have put together, the requirements you have. So again, depending on the business, the company, the project, program, whatever size, whatever you're doing, you have requirements from your customer and or client. You have to find a way to ensure that you're actually doing it. So that's where the the check comes into play. So not all companies, of course, have a quality team. They have, whoever might be assigned to do it. They should, of course, be separate from all other areas. They should be answering to the top. They should be knowledgeable in the standard that's being audited, whether it is the quality system or safety, environmental, IT, or whatever else it may be, right? You shouldn't just throw someone in there to do it. They're going to be creating a checklist based off of whatever the requirements are. You can Google it, you can search and see a whole bunch of different ISO checklists out there to use, but not everyone audits against ISO specifically because depending on the size of the business, you have your own system in place, you have your own documents, you have your own way of tracking what you're supposed to be doing for your customer and or client. So you may be auditing against those documents. So you may have a standard operating procedure, a work instruction, plan, whatever it is you're calling it in your business, that you're going to build your checklists off of, because that's what you as a business designed to be successful for your customer and or client. So again, this part is just about putting together a system within your quality plan on how you as a business will keep an eye on all those different activities that have been developed for you to be successful. So no matter who does it, it has to be checked by someone who's competent, who knows what they're looking for, knows how to put together, because it's all about checks and balances. We want to make sure that what we wrote is successful for our customer. We want to, I've seen it happen so many times. We build something and we just don't maintain it, and that's a problem. So we had to keep an eye on it, make sure we're doing it, because we're all here. No matter what we're doing as a business, we're here for our customer and client. Hey everyone. All right, so moving further into ISO 9001 2015 clause 9, 9.1.2, customer satisfaction. So we've already talked about that in previous videos. It's been in previous clauses, but there has to be now a check on that process, that system. So depending on the business, what you do, the size, you'll have some kind of system to collect feedback from your customer and or client. Now, oftentimes it is a survey type of system. Again, it varies, depends on what you're doing, how large of a company you are. There may be other ways to collect feedback that's more beneficial for you, but there has to be a system, a process in place to ensure that you do collect feedback, right? That's why this clause is here. You're checking to make sure that what you established earlier in the clauses is there and being worked, right? So you want to be able to hear from your customer, right? So if they're responding to you, you need to be responding back. That's going to be part of the whatever you want to call it, an audit or review of this piece within the quality system, that you are receiving feedback and that you are responding to the feedback. There may be times where you receive negative feedback that you as a business has to capture as a non-conformance because you did something incorrect, right? So there may be times you have to write up a non-conformance report against a customer feedback that you receive. So keep that in mind as well. Again, not everything we get from our customer and client is positive, right? No one out there is perfect, whether they are correct or not. They're the customer, and it's up to the business to do their best to try to correct the issue or identify that it's not actually us. It's not our fault. We followed the process as outlined, whatever it may be. As I said in a previous video a while back, customer is not always right. That's especially in the service industry, not always considered a good thing. And I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who would disagree with me. But, at least in my world, the customer is not always right. And we have documented information to show that. So we have to go to our client to show that. And then we get that all straight down, right? But it's just important that you have this and you're monitoring it. Hey, everyone. So hope everyone's having a great day wherever you are. I'm going to continue to discuss Clause 9, specifically for this video, 9.1.3, which is the analysis and evaluation of your business, of your quality system. All right, so it's making sure that we're doing what we're supposed to do. There's different ways of doing it. There's different aspects to look at. Oftentimes when you analyze data and evaluate how you're doing, there's going to be reports, showing how you're doing in the various aspects of whatever your business is. You're going to look at audit, surveillance reports, making sure you're meeting compliance to your customer and or client's requirements. You may have metrics and data and key performance indicators and a whole bunch of other stuff to let you know how you're doing in all the different aspects of what you're doing. Those have to be reviewed. They have to be monitored for meeting your requirements. Customer feedback is important. How are you doing in their eyes? That's part of what you have to analyze and evaluate. All that eventually feeds into your management review, which is going to be a later video. It's 9.3. But management reviews look at all the aspects of the quality system, the business system, right? So all the different elements of all the clauses that we've already gone through, to include Clause 10 that we will be going through, are a part of that review, looking at how we are doing as a business, company, program, project, and how can we do better, right? So no matter the size of the business, there should be something in place to ensure that you are doing what you need to do for your customer and client. Oftentimes you'll have something more extravagant, a lot more reports and all these different metrics all over the place, charts and stuff, the bigger the business you are. But it's all about just ensuring that you have something in place, especially if you have a quality system, especially if you want to follow ISO, that you have something documented. All right. Hey everyone, let's dive into the inputs of a management review for Clause 9.3 in ISO 9001:2015. I'm going to do 2 videos on this. I'm going to split the inputs in half because there's a lot. All right, so first up is previous actions. So from the previous management review, was there anything brought up that you need to track? You don't want to forget stuff. So that is there as the input to remind you, oh yeah, that's right. That came up in the last meeting. I don't want to forget to follow up on that, and I'll throw in an update on that. Next, depending on the business size, you may have a different amount of functional areas involved in your management review. So it depends on how you want to break it down, but how are they meeting, or you as a business meeting, your quality policy and objectives, or not meeting it? So that input is to ensure that you're tracking your quality policy objectives. You may have 1, you may have 5, who knows? You as a business determines that. But you have to show how you are doing that through documentation. So you input that into your the input. Just remember, data documentation is important to feed the review. All right, you can't just throw in, oh, doing great, meeting requirements. Okay, how? Show me. All right, next, how many audits are being conducted, internal and external, because you may have third parties coming in and auditing your system as well as you internally. Were there any non-conformances found? Yes, no. If there were, how many, and what were they, and how did you correct them? Monitoring and measuring. So this is important depending on what a business has as a requirement. A business may have a certain requirement from a customer or client that says you're going to do X, Y, and Z 90% of the time. So you have to have a way to show you're meeting that. So you have to have a system in place to monitor requirements and measure to ensure that you're meeting that percentage. That's an example, right? Next, do you have subcontractors? Do you have vendors? Do you have suppliers? You have to keep an eye on that, because even if you pass a risk to them, you still may be liable for their actions. So you have to keep an eye on them. So this input is there to ensure that you, if you have any, are monitoring those suppliers for them meeting your requirements, so you in turn meet your customer and or client's requirements, right? So that's the first half of the inputs. I'll get into the next half in the next video. And I hope everyone's doing good out there. All right, so now we have made it to 9.2, which is an important one within clause 9. So a business creates a quality system. Everything we've already gone through is establishing that. Oftentimes, and I've seen this happen with a lot of businesses, a lot of companies I have interacted with, they go to a third party to document their quality system because they don't have anyone within their company that can do that. So documenting, creating your system is one thing. Following it is another. So clause 9.2 is auditing. So you have to have internal audits of your system to ensure that what you documented, what you said you're going to do, you're actually doing. So whoever is chosen to do those audits has to be impartial. They have to be separate from all the areas they're auditing. And again, a lot of businesses, a lot of companies out there don't have a quality team in place, so they had to pick people to do it, which I don't really agree with. You need to dedicate a quality function in your business to be on top of all your actions at all times, because they have to have some experience in auditing. Can't really just throw someone in there. People might think it's easy. You have to have certain people that can do it. So 9.2 is important because you have to have something documented as a system of audits. So, how often are you going to audit? What are you going to audit? Of course, you should be auditing against whatever the requirement you have as a business, what you have designed for the success of your business for your customer and our client. So that quality person, whoever it is that's doing the audit, is going to create their checklist based on all those requirements. They're going to go out and they're going to check, and they're going to look at paper or in a system to look at documented information that it was done, right? So again, different companies might do it at different times. I prefer doing it against risk of the service, but other companies may want to just decide to go out and we'll do audits every 6 months or once a year or once a month or whatever. I don't know, but it should be risk-based in reality, right? Which is talked about earlier in ISO. So again, 9.2 just ensures that you as a business establishes a frequency of audits to ensure that you're doing what you say you're going to be doing, right? Hey everyone, so we have made it to the last part of clause 9. That's 9.3. I'll probably do a few short videos on this one to break it down more and have enough time, because there's a lot of little things that's a part of this. But 9.3 is the management review. So again, what you have set up and designed as a business needs to be reviewed every now and then, right? So on top of audits that we talked about, 9.2, leadership needs to come together to discuss various aspects of the quality system and make sure they're keeping an eye on their part. So there's, again, I'll talk about it in separate videos, but there's inputs, there's outputs. I'll do those separate. But the reviews, and again, it depends on the size of the company. It depends on each business, how they want to do it. Some are once a year. Some are once a year. It can take all day. Who knows how long? Because it depends on how big the business is. I've heard of some that will take 8 hours to do an annual review. There's some that might do it every month, every other month, every 6 months. The point is that leadership is looking, right? They're reviewing it. It's important to have data, to have actual numbers, information that is tied to documents, because in the end, the whole idea is that you've been doing something, and you have that to show that, yes, I'm doing that. And I've seen it many times where they'll say, oh, we're doing a great job, or we're providing excellent service to the customer, or they'll put NA or nothing to report, which isn't really good. There's really very few areas in a management review that will be empty. But the whole thing is to look at the health of your system. So saying you're doing great is not helpful if you have no data behind it to show that you are doing a good job for the review. So just remember that, yeah, you are doing the review, but it has to be useful as a business, of course. That you are participating, all the leaders are participating in that review, keeping an eye on the health of the system that was designed for you to be successful for your customer and or client. All right, so more to follow, more on this and some future. Hey everyone, let's dive into the inputs of a management review for Clause 9.3 in ISO 9001:2015. I'm going to do 2 videos on this. I'm going to split the inputs in half because there's a lot. All right, so first up is previous actions. So from the previous management review, was there anything brought up that you need to track? You don't want to forget stuff. So that is there as the input to remind you, oh yeah, that's right. That came up in the last meeting. I don't want to forget to follow up on that, and I'll throw in an update on that. Next, depending on the business size, you may have a different amount of functional areas involved in your management review. So it depends on how you want to break it down, but how are they meeting, or you as a business meeting your quality policy and objectives, or not meeting it? So that input is to ensure that you're tracking your quality policy objectives. You may have 1, you may have 5, who knows? You as a business determines that. But you have to show how you are doing that through documentation. So you input that into your to the input. Just remember, documentation is important to feed the review. All right, you can't just throw in, oh, doing great, meeting requirements. Okay, how? Show me. All right, next, how many audits are being conducted, internal and external, because you may have third parties coming in and auditing your system as well as you internally. Were there any non-conformances found? Yes, no. If there were, how many, and what were they, and how did you correct them? Monitoring and measuring. So this is important depending on what a business has as a requirement. A business may have a certain requirement from a customer or client that says you're going to do X, Y, and Z 90% of the time. So you have to have a way to show you're meeting that. So you have to have a system in place to monitor requirements and measure to ensure that you're meeting that percentage. That's an example, right? Next, do you have subcontractors? Do you have vendors? Do you have suppliers? You have to keep an eye on that, because even if you pass a risk to them, you still may be liable for their actions. So you have to keep an eye on them. So this input is there to ensure that you, if you have any, are monitoring those suppliers for them meeting your requirements, so you in turn meet your customer and or client's requirements, right? So that's the first half of the inputs. I'll get into the next half in the next video. And let's dive into the remaining inputs into a management review. All right, so the next one to talk about is the external or internal issues. So external, again, from outside your company, how is it impacting your business? Internal, what's happening inside your business, what's changed. You may change your processes for a reason. You can annotate that. There may be a customer or client change to their requirement, which is an external issue that affected you internally. All right. Next up is customer satisfaction, customer feedback. As we've already gone through, customer feedback is important. It's in a previous clause. You have to have something in place to track that. Again, as I've said before, data, numbers, documentation is important. So how are you doing with your customer? What kind of feedback are you getting? Do you have a system in place that can capture, percentage-wise how you're doing, right? Plus, you might also get feedback from outside of your customer comment card program, as an example. You may have meetings with the customer and client to discuss things. Heck, they might grade you. It depends on what you are doing as a business. All right, next up is process performance. How are you doing for complying to your requirements? So, is the system you built working? Is it compliant to your customer and or client's requirements? Again, you have to have a way of tracking that. And you could do that through quality control checks within a process. You could even technically use any internal audits you have to show that you are compliant. Maybe some external audits, third-party audits. Next up is opportunities for improvement. So how are you improving things? Do you have a process improvement program in place, which was, again, a previous clause in ISO to think about and design how you capture process improvements. So annotate what you've been doing to improve what you have internally for your customer and client. All right, then next is looking at risk. Risk is everywhere. We have risks all the time. You should already have that identified. Are your mitigation actions working? Has anything new come up? Have you had any opportunities? That's where that input goes. And lastly, resources. Again, we need to track what we need to be successful for our customer and our clients. So that's for that input. Do you have any resource issues? Annotate that. And then that way you can track that through these management reviews. All right. Welcome back. So this is the last part of 9.3 that I'm going to cover, and that is the outputs of a management review. Luckily, there's only a few compared to the inputs. So improvements. What improvements are you tracking? That is one output. All right. The second one is what changes have you made to your document system, whatever you may have, forms, work instructions, standard operating procedures, whatever it may be. What has been changed? And that's one of the outputs is to track that. And lastly, resources. This is an important one. So things may come up during each of these management reviews, depending on how often you have it, where resources is an issue, either staffing or equipment or whatever it may be, and you want to track that. So that is one of the outputs, and that's something to monitor for future management reviews, right? So once all this is done, then you, of course, have meeting minutes to record that you actually did do the management review. That's part of your records. And, that's it. You review the inputs, the outputs, however often you want to do it as a business, and you are monitoring, you're tracking your system in place to be successful for yourself and for your customer and our client. So that is 9.3 management review. And that closes out clause 9 of ISO 9001-2015. So next up is clause 10, which is the last one. All right, so more to follow on that. Everyone, hope you're all doing well out there today. Let's dive into Clause 10 of ISO 9001:2015, and that is improvements. All right, so we're at the last clause of ISO 9001:2015. All right, finally. So improvements is important. You have to have a way to show that you are able to improve what you're doing. So 10.1 is the general clause. And essentially, you as a business needs to show that you have a system in place to document improvements. So you have to have a way to get feedback from your customer and or client, because oftentimes we can improve what we're doing for them. We want to make sure that we are looking at ways of reducing potential for errors, any issues that come up, looking at automation, how can we get away from human error? Also look at non-conformances, because oftentimes that's not really thought of as an improvement. But when you look at a corrective and especially preventive action, out of that oftentimes can be an improvement that you can document. So every business out there is going to do it a little bit different. There's going to be more complicated methods and tools used for certain fields, certain companies, especially in aerospace and nuclear and other more high-tech and more complicated business models out there. Services and maybe some other sectors out there can use something a little simpler. No matter how you as a business captures improvement through a process, a document, it's important that you have it first off and that you're using it, right? Because if you are interested in a good quality system in following ISO principles and going out and get that certification, you have to have a way of showing that third-party auditor that you have something in place and you are using it. It's in your daily work. Because if you're out there doing work for your customer and or client every day, there's always something out there that you can improve upon, even if it's small. Okay, so that is the gist behind 10.1, the general clause under improvements. Have something in place, establish that, use it, get all the information you can from your customer and or client, get it from your employees, and work it. All right, hey everyone, let's continue to move into Clause 10 of ISO 9001:2015. The next one I'm going to dive into is 10.2, and that is the non-conformity and corrective actions. So there's got to be a way that as a business you're tracking issues that come up. And we've already talked about this in previous videos, of course, but to be successful, you have to have that system in place to capture either what you're finding internally as non-conformances issues during whatever you may have set up a quality audit, or if something comes up from your customer and or client, they may give you a non-conformance for not meeting a requirement they gave you, right? So you have to take customer feedback as a part of that. So again, identifying non-conformances is only the first step, whether you're doing it internal or the customer or client is doing it. But you, as a business, need to take immediate action. All right, you have to contain it as quickly as possible, and then work together as a team, whoever is impacted, by the non-conformance to find ways to correct it, of course, but ensure that it is prevented. Again, you have to look at your risk, because oftentimes someone might forget to add a risk. It happens. I mean, there's risks everywhere in what we do. We may miss something. So was that risk already identified in your internal system, in your internal processes? If it wasn't, then that could be added as a risk. And you're going to have some kind of action to mitigate it within your process. And if it was identified, then whatever you have in place didn't work. So this allows you to reevaluate it, right? But just remember that this clause is ensuring that business is tracking internally or external from your customer and or client, a way of fixing issues that arise. Because when non-conformances happen, you can take that and turn it into an improvement, which is what Clause 10 is all about. You are trying to find a way to improve what you're doing for your customer and client, because that's what you are meant to do as a business. How can I improve what I'm doing for them, right? So non-conformance can sometimes help you out with that. So that is the gist behind 10.2, having a system in place to capture, document non-conformances, corrective, preventive actions, looking at risks, and just treating it as an improvement. All right, you made it to the last part of Clause 10 in ISO 9001 and the last part of ISO 9001 period. It's 10.3, continual improvement. Continual improvement. So we're always looking at continuously improving what we do. There's different ways that you can capture that, and we've already gone through quite a few of them. You might identify them during audits. Non-conformances might identify improvements. You might get feedback from your customer and or client, where you can improve what you're doing for them. Your employees might just bring up an idea when they're out there working. So to meet this requirement, you have to have something documented. You have to have a system in place, a process, documents. Very important, right? You have to have something for the employees to utilize to document the improvement. Because there may be times where your customer and client wants to see it, right? So whether you have a complicated system or a less complicated system, depending on the methods and tools you utilize, it's just important to have a way to improve what we do. No matter how small it may be, there's always something that we can improve in our daily lives, whether at work or at home. So this is an important one, and it's often overlooked by most of the workforce. This is one of those things. It's not my responsibility. It's not my thing. Hey, it's you quality, right? Well, we're all out there doing the work every day, and we want to do things, I would hope, more efficiently, better, and how and what we do, but also for the customer and our client that we're handling, meeting with every single day, right? So whether you have different tools like Pareto charts, histograms, control charts, check sheets, and fishbone diagrams, and all the other fun stuff that you're using to document the improvements. Hopefully there is someone in the business that can assist in identification and documentation, and oftentimes, depending on the sector that a business works in, it can get complicated. But in the end, just remember that how you improve things needs to be for your audience. You need to be able to, of course, explain improvements. Google, look up 8 wastes. I'll put together a short video on that as well. That's something easy to just walk around the workplace and look at the waste that could be in there that you could eliminate, and you could save yourself some time and money, right? So just remember, it's continual. You should always be looking at how you can improve things in your work life and even at home. All right. Hey everyone. All right, so we just finished the final review of ISO 9001-2015. We went through the entire standard. Hopefully everyone learned a little bit about quality in those videos and reviews of the different aspects of it, why it's important, why we do it, why it matters in the end for the customer and our client, for your business, how you can also use it in your personal life. So hopefully you took something positive out of it. You can always send me messages, questions on the side. You can always comment in my videos wherever they're posted. But I'm just trying to educate folks on understanding why quality matters, why it's out there, why it impacts you in the workplace and your customer and or client. So thank you for those that watched, and keep watching.